Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast, and back for his weekly visit is my NFL and fantasy football expert, Andy Rioux, who's covered fantasy for nearly 20 years, and it's always good to catch up with you, Andy. I promise not to make you watch any more Broncos games during the show or in any of the future podcasts. That's a guarantee.
Those Broncos games are essentially dark humor at its finest in many ways.
Oh God, I can't wait till it's over with the Broncos. But let's get to the Texans because they get the Raiders this week. Technically, the Raiders with a worse record than the Texans, thanks to that Texans tie against the Colts in Game 1. Although the Raiders' stats, Andy, showed they're more middle of the pack. What do you make of this Raiders team so far?
Well, they've been in a lot of close games, but they found ways to lose, including their most recent game, the Monday Nighter in Kansas City, where they were within 1 point of tying the game and opted for a 2-point conversion, despite the fact that there was over 4 minutes to go. Then they managed to stop the Chiefs, and have one of the better kickers in football in Daniel Carlson, but because they were down a point, they essentially had to drive down at least to try the field goal, and they didn't have a very good late drive. So, your mindset probably changes a little bit when you're tied rather than being behind by a point. They also lost a game late at Tennessee where they couldn't convert on a 2-point conversion, and they blew a lead and lost to Arizona in overtime. So, yeah, if you're talking about the Raiders potentially being better than their record would indicate, you could make a case for that. But at the same time, this is a team with a new coach that has struggled in close games. So if the Texans can keep it close, they've got a shot.
The Texans have been masters at keeping it close, and they're just like the Raiders. They're masters at losing late in games and barely screwing things up at the end. But they did get a win the last time that they played, and they did it thanks to, of course, Dameon Pierce. The Raiders are 6th against the run, Andy. Is this bad news for Dameon Pierce and fantasy owners?
Well, I think you certainly have to keep him in the lineup. Certainly, the Raiders are better against the run than the pass, but I wouldn't consider Las Vegas to be a shy-away matchup in any form.
The Texans' run defense looked a little better against the Jags. As we speak, rookie third-round linebacker Christian Harris's status for this week still not known. We don't know if he'll play, and he's somebody who could help against Josh Jacobs. Andy, are you guessing Jacobs will chew up the Texans defense because he's been spectacular this season?
I think he's in line for another good game. I mean, he has been an incredible value for fantasy owners because he didn't warrant a high draft pick. Most people thought with Josh McDaniels coming in that it was going to lead to a New England style committee, and it has been anything but. He's been one of the top workhorses in the league, and yeah, definitely has very high end RB1 potential this week.
Hopefully we'll see the Derek Stingley matchup with Davante Adams. Levy's been using him a lot in cover 3, not too much in man-to-man. You hope that he'll help that. Well, you hope that it's going to help Stingley in the long run. And Andy, when I look at Davante's numbers, he's not putting up the numbers he put up in the last 2 seasons with Aaron Rodgers. That's not necessarily a surprise. Do you feel like he's still helping Derek Carr a lot? Was he, was it giving up the first and second round pick worth it for the Raiders?
Well, I think his numbers are still overall pretty good. I mean, they were kind of in the stratosphere in Green Bay, and I knew that he was going to take a bit of a step back going to Las Vegas because, Derek Carr is a quality quarterback. He's not quite at the same echelon as Aaron Rodgers most years, although this year he's actually in fantasy been a better quarterback than Aaron Rodgers, who really hasn't been able to get much going with his new cast up in Green Bay. I don't think the Raiders regret it. I mean, if you saw what Adams did against the Chiefs when he had 2 long touchdowns, they didn't have anybody like that previously. I mean, Darren Waller is a great tight end. Hunter Renfrow is a very steady underneath target and everything like that. So no, I don't think Las Vegas regrets it. I think there's just a lot of growing pains with Vegas. That's probably why they've lost some of these close games. Admittedly, Josh McDaniels has a little bit of a checkered track record as a head coach too. I don't really want to give up on him in this stage because it is early, and he has supposedly changed from the ways that he used to have in Denver when he was regarded as a major dictator. So we'll see what happens. I mean, the Raiders have the potential to get better as the season goes on, because unlike some of the teams that, are bad and just look absolutely hopeless, they've been competitive.
The Raiders, 6.5-point favorites. And considering how the Texans have played everybody this season and how the Raiders have looked, I'm a little bit surprised maybe that this isn't a closer spread. How do you see the game playing out? What do you think is going to happen here?
I think it's going to be a back and forth game. I think that the Texans will certainly be competitive, and they've got a good chance at getting under that line. But I do see Las Vegas winning it in the end.
Just a reminder for everybody watching or listening to subscribe, comment, and like us on YouTube. As we always let you know, it's the best way to support the show. Make sure to catch our live Texans postgame shows every week and our live Astros postgame shows all through the postseason. For those of you listening and watching on Wednesday morning, we're going to be doing one tonight, and we've got another one again on Thursday. So it's happening pretty quickly. Andy, I could watch the Chiefs play the Bills every week. Loved watching that game. This week, the Chiefs are at the Niners. I'm guessing you can't wait to see the Chiefs offense versus this Niners defense.
That's a very compelling matchup, although San Francisco has suffered some injuries of late that probably tilts the edge to the Chiefs. I mean, in most cases, the Chiefs have the edge anyways, but it's not necessarily going to be as much of a strength versus strength matchup as we were expecting originally when this game came out on the schedule and we started to build up into it as the season started. Definitely think the Chiefs will rebound. It was another classic against Buffalo, maybe not quite the shootout that some were expecting, but a great back and forth game between two of the great quarterbacks of the game. And Buffalo, obviously, they're on bye this week, so that's going to leave a big hole for a lot of fantasy owners. Philadelphia as well, also Minnesota and the Rams. So a lot of high-powered players off this week. But getting back to this particular matchup, the 49ers don't come in with a lot of momentum. I mean, they were thoroughly outplayed overall by Atlanta in kind of a surprising result to many people this past week. So, it may be a better week for the 49ers pass catchers because they're probably going to have to play a little faster this week against the Chiefs. If you're in a bind at quarterback this week, maybe you don't have Jalen Hurts or Jared Allen, or even Matthew Stafford or Kirk Cousins. I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo might be an okay flex play at the quarterback spot this week. Brandon Ayuk comes in with a lot of momentum. He had 2 touchdowns last week in the loss to Atlanta. And certainly George Kittle had a pretty good game, getting 80 yards or so receiving. Deebo Samuel, I mean, the Niners have weapons. I mean, they just need to get away from their overall conservative nature and be prepared to play faster against the Chiefs. For Kansas City, Juju Smith-Schuster had his best game since coming over from Pittsburgh this past week. I mean, Marquez Valdez-Scantling has remained involved. The running back situation is really a quagmire. I mean, last week we saw Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Jared McKinnon, and Isaiah Pacheco all get work. I mean, the plays would still be Edwards-Helaire and McKinnon, but I would suspect that probably the bigger numbers are going to come from the passing game this week, as they so often do with the Chiefs.
Texans fans are going to keep an eye on this Colts-Titans game, AFC South, of course. Matt Ryan's starting to look better, isn't he?
Matt Ryan looked great last week, and they've gotten a real boost from Alec Pierce, a rookie wide receiver. Michael Pittman, obviously, as he continues to progress, has become a really good receiver. The Colts were almost forced to pass a little bit because, of course, they didn't have Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines, although they got a great game from Deion Jackson. All 3 of those guys are a bit questionable this week in terms of injuries and whether they'll be able to play. So that's definitely something to monitor as the week progresses. But yeah, I mean, it could be another good game for Ryan. I mean, the Titans are a little bit vulnerable against the pass. Not really a lot of options for Tennessee. They'll certainly attempt to control the game on the ground with Derrick Henry, and he makes a good fantasy start as he pretty much always does. Robert Woods may come on a little bit more as he gets healthier. He had a week to rest, but obviously the Titans passing game, not one of the greatest in the league.
Right. And Pierce is a good name for a rookie this year, apparently.
Yes.
Geno Smith's Seahawks are at the Chargers with a short week for LA coming off their overtime win. Andy, I kind of think the Chargers might be a little tired and vulnerable after that game. And, of course, their kicking situation is going to be up in the air too, I assume.
Well, the Chargers are a crazy team. I mean, you never know what you're going to get every week from them other than just exasperating moments. But certainly they have the talent, and that's why they're 4-2 right now. They've managed to overcome somewhat questionable coaching, in my opinion. Seattle took a real step forward defensively. They'd just been absolutely gashed the previous 2 weeks by Detroit and New Orleans, but they put the clamps on Arizona. And like the Texans, they have a great rookie running back. Kenneth Walker stepped in after Rashad Penny was lost for the season with injuries. He had a great game against the Cardinals. It came at the expense of the passing game, although Geno came down to earth in that one. And that, of course, negatively impacted DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. I would expect another good game for Walker this week. We'll see about the passing game. I mean, certainly Metcalf and Lockett can be started. Not so sure about Geno coming off that weak game, but if the Chargers can get going offensively, and they were really in a rut Monday night, then Seattle may have to play at a faster pace to keep up. Austin Eckler has been tremendous for the Chargers over the past 3 weeks, 6 touchdowns, and a lot of catches and yardage during that span. So he was picked pretty high in the first round in many leagues, and he's definitely been justifying his first round selection after a slow start. One thing to monitor, the possible return of Keenan Allen. If that happens, it certainly should help prop up Justin Herbert. Mike Williams had a bad game this week on Monday night. He's been very hot or cold this year. He should rebound somewhat this week, I think, maybe even with a pretty big game. Chargers have been getting respectable production out of Gerald Everett at tight end, and that's, of course, typically a black hole in fantasy football. So Everett can be used if needed, and he may very well be the best option for some teams out there.
You made me think of an idea of the next T-shirt that I'm going to start selling, and it's the Chargers are like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get.
Yeah, exactly.
You were talking about the coaching with the Chargers. I'm going to throw this out at you. Nathaniel Hackett, Staley, Josh McDaniel. You got your 3, besides Andy Reid, coaches in the AFC West. Which one of those guys do you want?
Well, I would say in many ways it would probably be McDaniels, just because of his long track record of success coordinating New England's offense, even though Staley has ultimately been the most successful of that trio. He did have the Chargers at least in position to make the playoffs last year, although some of his questionable decision making in that final game against the Raiders was a big reason why they missed. Hackett just looks horrible. I mean, just absolutely horrible. I mean, I could see a case for Staley over McDaniels, certainly, but it's just technically McDaniels has the most experience of that group. I don't know what to say about Hackett. I mean, as I mentioned, watching a Broncos game is basically the equivalent of watching a very dark humor movie at this point in time.
I don't know if you heard what Troy Aikman said during the broadcast, but he did not think much of the Broncos' route trees with the wide receivers. And I don't know if that was a criticism of the receivers and the routes that they were running, or if that was a criticism of the coordinator and the routes that the offense was setting up. But I just thought that was kind of an interesting point there.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously Russell Wilson has struggled much more than people would have anticipated. And Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy are talented players. I mean, it's not like, they're trying to make Russ make it work with fringe NFL prospects or anything, or guys that just came off the practice squad. So it's just an absolute mess there. They've got their bye coming up in week 9. I mean, it would be extremely crazy for a coach to be fired in the first year, but they're 2-4 right now. If they were to go to 2-6, maybe that's the time they pull the plug on everything.
Speaking of the Broncos, they got the unstoppable New York Jets. Jets, and Dameon Pierce might have captured our hearts. But Andy, these two teams, a couple of great running backs, right?
This has really so far been the year of the rookie running back. And Kenneth Walker just really got in on the party the past couple of weeks. But Breece Hall and, of course, Dameon Pierce have just been absolutely phenomenal for their respective teams. I mean, the Jets have barely passed the ball the past couple of weeks. It's been the Hall show. It's been very much throwback football here, where you don't have the quarterback throwing very much and you have the running back going crazy. So it's obviously been a very good coaching job by Robert Saleh. A lot of people thought he had promise coming over from the 49ers. And this looked to be a lost season for the Jets, but right now they're in contention. And Breece Hall is definitely one of those guys you want in your lineup every week. He's got the potential to win weeks for you, and even on his off weeks, he's still going to do pretty good. So, yeah, I mean, there's a real race right now. I mean, Dameon Pierce, Breece Hall, Kenneth Walker. Which one's going to be the best rookie running back? And it may be just like splitting hairs because they all look great at this point.
Do you have a preference after watching those three so far?
Wow. I mean, they've all looked really good. I'd say Pierce has kind of had some of the more, violent, impressive runs, so to speak. So I will give him the nod at this point, but I'd be thrilled to have any one of the three in my backfield.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And both the Falcons and the Bengals are 3-3. That's our final game. What grabs you about this game? Because Falcons kind of sort of flying under the radar, I guess, at 3-3. If you're talking about the Falcons that we expected to see this year and what they've done.
I didn't expect to see Atlanta at 3-3. No, absolutely not. And I want to point out something right now. If you're looking in free agency for defenses, and eventually a lot of owners will stream defenses in week 8 and week 10, Atlanta happens to play Carolina. So I wouldn't compare the Falcons to the 2000 Baltimore Ravens by any means. But if you've got 2 games in 3 weeks against Carolina, you've got a chance at finding success. And after that, they've got teams like Chicago and Washington. So if you missed out on one of the top defenses, and obviously, you're not going to see Buffalo hit the waiver wire in most circumstances, I would definitely look at Atlanta for those games ahead with the Panthers. Obviously, you don't want to play them this week against Cincinnati, but they've been very impressive. They've largely operated as a run-based team. Tyler Algier, a rookie, has been part of that. Cordell Patterson was part of that before he got hurt. Marcus Mariota has been running a lot. They really haven't been a great fantasy team. Drake London, who's a rookie wide receiver out of USC, their first-round pick, has been impressive at times. But they haven't been able to get Kyle Pitts going, and he was considered to be one of the best prospects at tight end ever just a year ago. So it's odd because the Falcons are definitely having more real-life success than fantasy success at this point in time. And I think the train may slow for Atlanta a little bit against Cincinnati. Even though the Bengals are a little bit disappointing at 3-3, they really came alive down in New Orleans last week. Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase were clicking, and I would expect them to do the same, as well as Joe Mixon. There's still a lot of talent in Cincinnati, especially if T. Higgins can get healthy again. And they showed it against the Saints in a clutch come from behind victory. So I think Cincinnati's probably gotten back on track and will continue that trend this week.
I feel like we've seen the best 2 teams in the AFC this past weekend with the Bills and the Chiefs, but the NFC, the Eagles, they look like the clear number 1. Just out of curiosity, is there a number 2 or a clear delineated number 2 for you with the NFC? I mean, the Cowboys, assuming they get Dak Prescott back and he's healthy, the way they've played defensively, are they the number 2 team in the NFC right now?
I think you can make a case for them. I mean, Dallas did beat the Giants with Cooper Rush, and obviously the Giants deserve a lot of credit for how they're playing and everything like that. But I still think in the end, when you're evaluating the quarterbacks of those teams, that if Dak is healthy, and of course Jalen Hurts for Philadelphia, there's less of a ceiling with New York, with Daniel Jones, obviously. I mean, as far as the other contenders in the NFC, I mean, Minnesota certainly deserves a lot of kudos for being 5-1. They were thumped badly in Philadelphia, though, so it's hard to say they're on the same level at this point as the Eagles. Tampa Bay looks to be a little, discombobulated right now. Same with the Rams. Same really with San Francisco. I'm not quite ready to consider Seattle a prime contender. I mean, those three teams are all tied for first. Green Bay looks like a bit of a mess right now. Atlanta, again, impressed by what they're doing. Not sure I want to pencil in the Falcons in the Super Bowl. So, yeah, it's quite possible that the best two teams in the NFC are Philadelphia and Dallas.
Well, if you want to ask Andy any fantasy questions, anything NFL related, he's at Andy Rioux on Twitter. It means a lot to me personally that he gives me a few minutes to rack his brain every week. Some of you might remember I roped him into doing weekly trivia shows when I hosted the Locked On Texans podcast. I miss doing the trivia, although I'm sure Andy does not miss prepping for that show. But hey, Andy, always a blast, and let's do it again next week.
Sounds good.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Hey, you can support the show by subscribing on YouTube and commenting on the videos. Listen to Houston Sports Talk on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, and Google. Don't forget to tell a friend and share our show on social media. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.